Jonathan, welcome. On that note, many of these companies have taken to sort of upgrading themselves and building out the infrastructure themselves. What could the US government actually do in order to speed that effort along?
Well, the bottom line here is that we know that to deliver broadband to all Americans, regardless of where they live, particularly in rural America, requires a public-private partnership. Private investment can't do it alone. Our companies are investing close to $80 billion a year in upgrading and delivering broadband to as many Americans as we can. But to reach those last 18 to 20 million Americans that still don't have broadband, we need to work with government. And that's why what government can do is invest, is have targeted, focused programs to invest, to work with us in delivering broadband, particularly to rural Americans. That's what we were hoping to hear from the White House today. I hope that we'll be hearing it soon.
And obviously, the soon is the critical component here. One of the aspects of infrastructure spending, unfortunately, is that it is slow. Even once announced, it can be a long time to get out the door. What's your hope for how quickly, if you get what you want in the form of an announcement, of actually getting dollars into hands to actually do the work?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a great initiative that right now is we're getting geared up for. It's called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is a reverse auction that's going to be managed by our Federal Communications Commission. That's going to be delivering in its first phase at the end of October over $16 billion to deliver broadband to unserved American communities in our rural parts of our country. If we can get through that auction on time and move forward and get those dollars deployed as quickly as possible, where we are hoping that it will just be a matter of weeks, months after the auction that we can begin to actually deliver the dollars that can pull more fiber to more American communities, to connect those left behind Americans and get us ready across the country for our 5G future.
Assuming that there is an infrastructure bill at some point and something that goes through, Jonathan, who decides how the money gets divvied up and between what rural communities? I mean, obviously, you're going to have politicians arguing for their states, right? How do you avoid an unfair sort of distribution of all of the funds?
Well, right now, there's a lot of data that we have that has shown where American communities, we call them census blocks or census tracts, that don't yet have broadband access. What the first phase of this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund is going to be focusing on where we know those communities are. Going forward, what we need to have are much more refined and accurate broadband maps that we at USTelecom and our members have helped actually design. Congress has passed legislation. The FCC is working on actually getting ready to deploy those maps. What we need, though, is for our colleagues in Congress to appropriate the monies. It's only about $28 million to fund those maps, so we can have an efficient mechanism, finally, to pinpoint with accuracy and efficiency for American taxpayers where those remaining underserved broadband communities are, so we can get broadband not only to where it currently is, but where it's not.
We get obviously focused on rural, and there are clear reasons for that. But there's also issues of racial discrimination, of socioeconomic discrimination in urban centers. What's your kind of commitment now of all times, when there's so much heightened sensitivity to wanting to address some of those discrepancies? What can you as an industry do to actually focus your attention there?
It's a great and important question. It's not only timely, but committing to actually deliver broadband for all Americans means that's not just in rural America, but it's in our inner cities, in our suburbs, and in our exurbs. Our companies, from the very beginning of this pandemic and before and through it now, have really stood up tall to deliver not only the promise of keeping those customers that we've had that have been impacted adversely, economically and otherwise, by this pandemic, to keep them connected. We've stood up early to commit to the pledge that our government has asked us to maintain that connectivity. Companies like AT&T investing $10 million in distance learning, Verizon $55 million so far in programs to just address connectivity issues caused by COVID. And this is across the board. What we need to do is to ensure that we can deliver programs in the immediate term that will keep those Americans impacted by the pandemic connected, whether they're in rural parts of our countries or in our cities. make sure that we have the infrastructure to deliver distance learning, distance telemedicine, and in the long term, ensure that we can not only address the access issues, but also the affordability issues. We want to make sure that the United States broadband customers can continue to keep the best broadband service that exists in the world at the most competitive prices. And we're intent on making sure that that happens, and so are our companies.